How much can you know about yourself if you've never listened to a podcast? That's right, decide if you want to give us the ass or the crotch as you pass by and listen to our continuing conversation about Fight Club in part 2 of this episode of Blind Spots and Second Thoughts. Welcome to Blind Spots and Second Thoughts and to part 2 of our continuing conversation about Fight Club. If you want to know Heather's impressions of the movie before she watched it and a lot of our initial thoughts on the movie, make sure to check out part 1 of this episode. And now let's jump to part 2 of our recap of Fight Club. Okay, so let's get into the movie. So it begins with that just crazy opening credits. It just starts the 20th Century Fox logo. You have the little strings, and then it just hits so hard with that opening score and the opening credits. For the opening credits, one of the things they wanted to do was to see if they could leave like a subliminal impression on your eyes, like flash your eyes to where you had an after image for the opening credits. And I think legal was like, no, you can't do that. You could possibly kill people or burn their retinas. So maybe don't do that. So they got as close as they could to giving that feeling of an after image for the opening credits when they flash to the set of the music. You fly out of Edward Norton's hair follicle. The idea is you're in the fear center of his brain.
Okay.
So it was the fear center of his brain, and you fly out from the neuron all the way out through his head to Tyler Durden holding Jack at gunpoint with a gun in your mouth. You speak only in vowels. We see the bomb, we see the gun, we see the skyscrapers, and then we flash back to Jack at his testicular cancer group. We meet Bob very briefly, and then we flash back even further. So that's the first point that the movie is like, okay, now we're really going to mess with the narrative. We're really going to show you that this is not a conventional movie. The narrator has insomnia. He can't sleep. We have the really cool shot. Again, one of those things that visually made the movie stand out and now is just whatever because everybody does this. But in 1999, the shot where you see the trash and you're coming up from the trash and he's narrating about space exploration and corporations, that shot was a visual effects shot that was relatively expensive at the time.
Very cool.
It was very cool. We also see our first Subliminal Brad. Did you clock the Subliminal Brads?
I clocked glitches or some kind of visual blip, but I didn't know until later what it was. And I didn't even really know that it was Brad. I just figured out later when we get to the fact that he's a projectionalist and he splices in the, quick subliminal shots that I realized what those blips were.
Yeah, they were little blips. I think I want to say there's 5 Subliminal Brads before we actually meet Tyler. And then in the hotel, when he has his monologue about single serving friends, at the very end, he pops the mint. And then there's the video of everyone in the hotel staff saying, welcome. Brad Pitt's in the bottom right-hand corner.
Oh, I didn't notice that. That's really cool.
So that's like the last Subliminal Brad he's just right there. He's just welcome.
I don't remember seeing 5. I think I only remember seeing 2, but they were so quick that if I was taking a note during any of them, I could see why I would have missed it.
I don't think I could name them all, but that's one of those things where I've seen it so many times I could point them out when they happen.
And then there's a penis at the end. I saw that.
So Jack has his boring 90s office job. There's a really good video that I want to recommend that I think everyone should watch called Why All Movies from 1999 Are the Same from Now You See It on YouTube. It's a really, really great video essay that just talks about how the 1990s had a very carefree and fun atmosphere, but there was this sort of particularly cultural vibe, especially from movies in 1999, where you have characters rebelling against authority, identity crisis, existential angst. It really talks about a lot of common themes between Office Space, The Matrix, Fight Club, American Beauty. It's a really, really great video essay about how the end of the 90s rolling into the Bush years, we didn't know they were going to be the Bush years at the time, but rolling into the Bush years really was sort of a transitory point and kind of an inflection point. And it's so interesting now in hindsight, especially to look back and see what the commonality was through all of those. So I would definitely say if you're listening to this podcast, you really, really should go check out the video essay, Why All Movies from 1999 Are the Same. By Now You See It on YouTube, and I'll link that in the description for the podcast as well. So
these themes make sense to me for 1999 because it wasn't even just the end of the 90s and going into the Bush years, but it was a new millennium. And I was young at that time, as I was 13 in 1999, but I remember that. I remember the overall feelings of just a kind of uncertainty and, you know, the technology of the time and how things were changing as we approached the new millennium. And Y2K aside, it was a scary time, but exciting also.
Yeah. And I remember it as we had a decade of prosperity, but also peace. Like it was, you know, the decade after the Cold War. The U.S. didn't really have any real enemies at the time. We hadn't started the war on terrorism. 9/11 hadn't happened. We had this crazy economic prosperity. So things were good, but there was still this general dissatisfaction. Everybody had an office job with a cubicle, and an office job with a cubicle was terrible. That kind of attitude was very pervasive. And again, Generation X trying to find their voice. As far as I know, they're still looking.
Well, and that's interesting because at that time, Gen X was pretty young.
Yeah, they would have been in their 20s.
I know that part of what has happened to Gen X over the years has been they're this sort of lost generation between the baby boomers and the millennials, who are both much more, I don't know, well-defined might not be the right way of putting it, but just having come of age during more explosive times than Gen Xers. So I think that's why they still are, because in 99, they didn't really have the millennials to compare themselves to yet. But then, you know, we started getting older and 9/11 happened and Gen X really just got caught in that. They're the middle children. Sorry, Gen Xers. So
Jack can't sleep. He goes to see probably the least helpful doctor in the world.
Yes.
I always thought that was interesting because it always struck me. I always thought, like, Jack makes good money. And then now I'm watching it, looking back, and I'm like, Jack made okay money. It was also the 90s. So, like, Jack could afford a condo. Jack could afford a condo on a mess salary.
Yeah.
So even though his health insurance wasn't so great and he had to see his doctor in the middle of a hallway.
That was strange. Yeah, no, I didn't understand that.
I mean, it works well because it does add to the sort of ambience of the movie where everything is terrible. And so you're giving the narrator more reason to rebel against things, and health insurance is awful. But yeah, imagine like a terrorism group starts because you wouldn't prescribe Ambien.
That doctor has a lot to answer for. I will say also, I don't necessarily think that this was intentional, but I had some thoughts, you know, in these very first scenes of the movie that I was already seeing that there were some themes about gender and an interplay between masculinity and femininity. And I thought it was interesting that his doctor wouldn't help him, because that's a very female experience to go to a doctor and be told that there's nothing wrong. Yeah, there's nothing wrong. You just need to exercise more and, you know, do X, Y, and Z and you'll be fine. I don't necessarily know that was an intentional inclusion, you know, in the script or from the director, but I thought that really fit in. And I can say what some of those things were, because right away we do meet Bob, and it's a testicular cancer support group. So it is people who have lost their testicles, and Bob has breasts, and he is crying about, am I still a man? And so there's that idea of like, what does it mean to be a man? And so again, I'm already seeing that's going to be maybe one of the themes of the movie is masculine identity. And then Edward Norton is in his office and he is shopping for furniture from IKEA in a catalog. And he calls, to order. And he specifically references a dust ruffle. And I don't know if that meant anything to you or if it was just kind of like a line, but that is very feminine coded, that he is interested in his furniture. And a dust ruffle is probably one of the most feminine accents that you could name. A man might not care about having a dust ruffle. That just read very female to me. And as if it was a criticism of him, or it was like, oh, this is why he is going to eventually need to sort of rebel in this very violent way because he cares about dust ruffles.
I think it's interesting. I would argue that it's not necessarily feminine versus masculine, but maybe, actually, you're probably right. Because I was thinking, because it is the contrast between being soft and being hard. And you think of soft as feminine coded. And that's a really good point. That's a good call out. I think the doctor thing, I think now especially there's a lot more visibility into women's issues and women's health and understanding that as a women's experience. So I don't know. I mean, David Fincher is a very meticulous director, so that might have been important. But also, I mean, just to counterpoint, a big part of the manosphere and that kind of masculine movement came out of men feeling like they were being ignored, like their needs weren't being taken into account, because a lot of, especially in the 90s, was sort of that first movement of, you're a man, you're fine, we're not worried about you, we're worried about women right now, we're worried about all of these other things, and getting hit with the double whammy of man up, be a man, don't, you have to not show your feelings, you have to be the strong one, all of that stuff. So being simultaneously told you have to suppress all of your emotions and you're not important, and then also not feeling like you had a voice. I mean, that's what led to a lot of that incel culture and all of that kind of thing. And so I think the movie really does find that and find the pulse of that at the inflection point, the beginning of when it started to get really bad.
Oh, 100%. And I have thought about these kinds of issues before. And I have said, one of my favorite feminist sayings is the patriarchy hurts everyone, because we do have these ideas about men are supposed to be like this and women are supposed to be like this. And so you watch a movie like this where he's initially framed as being maybe weak and more emotional, and he is ordering dust ruffles in, I believe, cornflower blue is a color that comes to mind, which is in that, these are very, they're, what's the opposite of a microaggression? They're like a micro symbol of femininity, of things that women might be more concerned with than men typically are. And it's like, it's a problem for a man to behave quote unquote like a woman. So we have been concerned culturally with women's rights and women's role in society. But part of the problem is that those behaviors are not inherently gendered. So when you say, well, women are supposed to act like this and women are fighting back, it is equally, it's the flip side of the coin to say that if a man acts like this, that's also a problem.
Something else that you might not know that might color the movie understanding this. Chuck Palahniuk wrote the book in 1996. If I recall correctly, he was interviewing and talking to a lot of men of his generation. He's Generation X, and talking about their experiences in gyms. But also something that they didn't know at the time, he was closeted. He was gay and was in the closet and didn't come out until after the movie came out. So a lot of the novel is probably also colored by Chuck Palahniuk's experiences as a closeted gay man and that struggle between femininity and masculinity and what does it mean to be a man and what does it mean to be a straight man, especially. So that also, I think, adds a very interesting retrospective on the movie's themes and some of the other elements of the movie, knowing that the author of the book was closeted gay at the time.
Absolutely.
So that then leads our narrator to his support groups, because the doctor, the worst doctor in the world, says, go check out testicular cancer. That's real pain. So he goes and he finds himself finally having a safe space and a support group. And this is another thing where in 2024, we just say, go to therapy, dude. Like everybody accepts it. We're assaulted with BetterHelp ads on every single podcast. So therapy is just kind of a normal part of life. And a lot of, probably Gen X and older men are resistant to that. But everybody understands that mental health is important now. And in 1999, that was still very novel. And that was still something that you had these attitudes from the 80s and the 90s, like that's not masculine. So ultimately, he just needed emotional support. He just needed a place where he could cry.
And for people to listen to him. He specifically says that at these support groups, you feel like people are actually listening to you and not just waiting for their turn to talk.
Exactly. And that's what Marla needs too. So I think one of the creators, I think it was Jim Oles, the screenwriter, said they came at it as sort of a twisted romantic comedy where you have these two people who are perfect for each other because they have this connection, but they are just incapable of talking to each other. And that leads to terrorism and buildings exploding and cults.
He should have just asked her on a date, maybe. None of this would have happened.
Exactly. That's what they said. They said all of this ultimately is because, and even the narrator says all of this is because of Marla Singer, because he can't talk to a girl. It's the incel to terrorism pipeline.
I mean, that's a joke, but not really.
It really isn't. That's how it happens. So the doctor then leads him to the support groups. He goes and becomes a tourist because he finds that it is emotionally satisfying and that cures his insomnia. I want to talk about the meditation scene, the cancer meditation, when he goes in and finds his power animal. And it's a penguin.
It is a penguin.
And the penguin says, slide.
So what do you think that means?
I don't know. I think it's funny. I come at it. I am colored by the commentary. And so knowing the technical things about it, that scene, the CGI in that scene, apparently the CGI team came back with a very, very, like a photorealistic penguin. And David Fincher said, no, it needs to look like Mary Poppins. So then they had to go back and they had to modify the penguin to look like a realistic Mary Poppins cartoon penguin.
I think it's an interesting choice as his power animal because, again, a penguin is known for being cute. It's known for being kind of innocent, playful, So, again, if you're just thinking about these themes of aggression versus softness, it's pretty clear on which side of the spectrum the penguin would land.
Well, and the other thing is what the penguin says is slide, and it's ultimately maybe you could say it's his psyche or his body telling him to just let go. That's one of the things that is emphasized, where he's holding on to stuff that isn't important and his body is trying to tell him to let go. So slide. The first thing he thought of is a penguin that slides, but also it's just funny. Yeah,
it is funny.
Also, another fun fact, all of the ice cave scenes, when you see the cold breath, it's recycled cold breath from Titanic.
Oh, interesting. I just had a thought about letting go, because that is something that gets brought up throughout the movie about hitting bottom. And that is sort of the ultimate letting go of just any attachments, letting go of specifically material goods, because there is this anti-consumerism message in the movie. But I would argue that based on the feelings that a penguin gives me anyway, I would think that if the penguin is saying slide and the idea is let go, It's maybe not let go in those ways that get reiterated as the movie goes on, but more just let go of these preconceived ideas about what it's supposed to be like. Embrace loving your dust ruffle.
Right. No, I think that's a really good point. And I think that's one of the reasons that I love this movie so much is there's so much context and there's so much that you can read into it. And it's just so brilliantly executed. I think another thing, if you want to take it another level, and again, I have no idea author intent or how much of this is planned or how much of it is just like a penguin is a funny animal to have a power animal. You think it's going to be a lion or a gorilla. And it's just this cute little Mary Poppins penguin who waddles out.
But that's exactly my point. I'm saying that doesn't seem unintentional to me. Given the themes of this movie, I don't think, why is it funny? It's funny because it's a weak, cute, innocent animal. And so that's not the right kind of power animal for a man.
I also think it's something that you touched on that is also interesting because you said let go of attachments, things like that. And I think that's one of the things where the movie, it does a really good job of illustrating right math problem, wrong answer. It's attachments aren't the problem. And emperor penguins, everyone saw March of the Penguins, right? Like we know that emperor penguins mate for life and they have very strong family structures. So it's not about letting go of attachments, but Tyler Durden does. He's right into a sense that you are not your job. You are not your possessions, but also you do have a name. You aren't just an all singing, all dancing crap of the world. You aren't just nothing. Like you do matter. And so it's one of those things where you maybe take something too far, or you're looking at something from the wrong angle and you draw the wrong conclusion. And I think the penguin is a really good example of, you can say, oh, is a penguin bad? Is it negative? Or is it that's who he really is and he should embrace that, and he doesn't.
That's how that reads to me.
And he doesn't, and then people get hurt.
That's what he sees. That's his innermost subconscious sort of, you enter that space and you just think about what comes to your mind first, and like that's what's in him, but he fights that. He fights that instinct.
So then we get to know Bob a little bit more. We catch back up to the first flashback. Again, I love the narrative structure of this movie. I love the way that the movie plays with linearity and breaks the fourth wall. So we catch back up to the original flashback and we meet Bob. And then shortly after, we meet Marla. Such a great introduction. The music, the stomping. She walks in with the cigarette and she says, "This is cancer, right?"
It's like she's a monster.
And she's a very small woman, but they do make her a force in this movie. She's not the first woman that we see, but she makes such a strong impression. So Jack goes to confront Marla. They agree to split the groups. We have the great scene where they're walking down the street having a really kinetic walk and talk. She walks into the laundromat, steals somebody's clothes, and goes to sell them at the thrift store. You got to wonder, the lady at the thrift store really didn't care, because those clothes would have either been partially damp or hot from the dryer. And the lady at the thrift store was just like, she was only concerned when Jack said he wanted bowel cancer.
Yes. Well, I was going to talk about their comparisons of the different meetings and how bowel cancer is both of their favorites. And I was wondering why that was. I thought that was funny. But I mean, just overall, the setting of the movie, Jack, Edward Norton, lives in a very nice and very nicely decorated apartment or condo, as we see. But a lot of the other stuff that we're seeing is I felt like I needed to take a shower after watching this movie, because it just looked grimy and just decaying, and everything was dark, and just felt like that fit in with the woman just being like, whatever, I'm not going to ask any questions. It's just like, this is not a place where people are thriving.
Right. So then after that, we get into learning about Jack's job, what he does, the very, very dark scene where they talk about the recalls. You see the guys who are talking about the charred corpses.
Yes.
He's describing his job to the woman on the plane. The really great line, "What car company do you work for?" "A major one." The really cool FX shot of the plane crashing into the other plane.
Yes. I thought, we should watch Final Destination.
Which leads to Jack meeting Tyler on the plane. So their first conversation that they have, where Tyler is being absolutely smooth and telling him that he makes soap.
That is a very interesting choice given what the movie seems to be saying about gender. Again, because that's to me reads as gendered.
Okay.
Soap making.
Really? Well, I would argue soap making isn't. It's the act of using the soap and buying the soap, because they even call out like rich women buying their own fat asses. But soap making, it's the same thing. It's like candle making or carpentry. Like it's one of those things that is maybe a little bit more, you think of somebody with a cauldron and bubbling, and you don't think of women soap makers. You think of women as soap consumers, but not necessarily soapistry artists.
Well, and that may be true, especially if you're talking about from, soap making as a more industrial job. But when I think of it, I think of soap making as a hobby, which is...
I would argue that that's more recent. Like that's
probably
sort of an
what's
internet
informing.
trend. And you think about your women friends on Facebook who make bath bombs as a hobby and try to sell them to you for $25.
No, that's very fair. And that probably is informing my perspective on that.
Yeah.
But I think even there is something there too with that soap itself is more directed at women. So even in 1999, maybe you're correct that soap making was not gendered, but the fact that there is some kind of a gender component to it.
I mean, I would argue that the crafting of it is gendered. Like you think of it as craftsmen, and like even the word craftsman.
Yeah.
It's a craftsman, not a craft person or whatever. So the act of making the soap is, I think, more gendered. But also, I think more than anything, it's the fun contrast of the marketing image of the pink bar of soap with Fight Club carved into it. That was a fun marketing image. But I think more appropriately for the book and the plot, it's because the adjacency to explosives. Soap making is adjacent to explosive making. I think you could maybe draw a line. And then even to carry that theme, if you want to draw a little bit of a line, you could say Jack started making soap because he couldn't sleep and he read a book or he read a Reader's Digest article or something like that. So he started making soap, and then he learned about the explosive things, and that's where his sleep deprived mind went. So you could even draw a line and say, if you are going to say that Jack's hobbies and philosophies were a little bit more feminine coded, he started making soap as a hobby, and then it turned into a small business.
Yeah, no, I see that.
Tyler is the guy that Jack wants to be. He is both appealing to Jack and a little derisive of him.
It's interesting thinking about that from the perspective of knowing the twist of the movie, that these are Jack's self-loathing thoughts.
A nice touch too also is like, where are you getting up and going on a plane? He gets up, he takes his briefcase, and he goes to first class.
Yes.
So like, is he just going to go take a free seat in first class because he doesn't care? Is he just going to use the bathroom in first class because he doesn't care?
Or is this just how Edward Norton is having him disappear because he's done with him for that
It's a really
moment?
Good, I think from a movie perspective, it's really good because it does give him this sort of element of chaos, because you are stuck on a plane with who you're next to. And so this guy just gets up and leaves.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I was reading a little bit about the movie after we watched it, and I know that there is this, and it's referenced in the movie too, but there is a relationship between Tyler emerging and Jack's sleeping. And so, he's on a plane. Like maybe there's something there too with he's having this conversation with this imaginary friend, but then he's like falling asleep. So now Tyler's going off on his own.
So Jack goes home, and that's when he discovers that his condo has exploded. And you get the really cool visual shot of how it might have happened with the zooming around the apartment.
I immediately thought about the conversation that Jack and Tyler have on the plane about making explosives when I saw that there had been an explosion. So again, I know I had the benefit of already having an idea of what was going on, but I didn't know that was something that happened in the movie. So I immediately was like, he blew up his own apartment.
Yeah, this is one of those movies that if you haven't seen the movie, it's so much better experience not knowing anything going in, because it's really obvious from the beginning. If you are thinking about it, that Tyler blew up his apartment, or he blew his own apartment up because essentially he was just trying to literally blow up his life. But you wouldn't necessarily, like, I didn't make that connection the first time I watched it. And I think a lot of people didn't if they didn't know what was going on. So you might have a suspicion, like, why would his apartment blow up? And the movie goes out of its way to show you, here's what happened. Right. But that's not what happened.
But it is interesting because later on, before the reveal of the twist, Tyler does make a comment about, this is why I blew up your condo. And that is interesting. Like, I would wonder how people read that when they saw this movie for the first time without knowing the twist, because they meet on the plane and then he gets home after that flight and his apartment has exploded. So, like, what reason, if Tyler was indeed a separate person, what reason would he didn't even know him at the time. So I'm just like, obviously I had an inkling of what that meant because I suspected what was coming. But for people who didn't have that foreknowledge, like, that would be so confusing of like, what? Why would you do that? Somebody you didn't even know? Were you stalking? I don't know. I was like, how do people feel about that?
That's the part where the movie really does start to shake you and let you know you've been watching an unreliable narrator. Mm-hmm. Things aren't necessarily as they seem. And it's right at that tipping point, right before the third act changeover. Right. So, but
just generally, I was going to say there is an undertone of chaos through the whole movie. So I could see how that would mask these confusing elements that might point at what's going on, because you really just don't know what's happening a lot of the time.
Jack finds his destroyed apartment. He again tries to call Marla and chickens out, and then calls Tyler. Tyler doesn't answer, and then star 69's a payphone. Again, that's one of those other hints that, because you couldn't, youths out there listening to this, you couldn't star 69 a payphone. You might get a phone number, but it wouldn't actually ring back. A lot of payphones you couldn't call. Some payphones you could. Know that. Some payphones you could call, but very few of them. Most payphones, especially in 1999, if you star 69, it would either say unavailable or it wouldn't let you call back. I also want to say it is kind of funny because star 69, if I recall correctly, they charged you per use of it. So
that sounds right.
Yeah. So
did caller ID caller ID existed in 1999?
Barely.
Okay.
Star 69 was what we used because no one had those. For caller ID, you had to have the little box next to your phone, and those were expensive, and it cost like an extra like $10 a month, which in 1999 that was like the equivalent of $500 now. So. So
I
nobody
probably
had caller ID.
I probably did.
Yeah, because you were a rich girl.
A rich girl. Mm-hmm.
So another story about this, another reason, because I really did love this movie. When I was in college, we had to do Spanish lab. So we had to do a language lab hours for my Spanish class. So we would go into the Spanish lab, into the language lab, and we could do whatever we needed to do as long as it was either studying or watching something in Spanish. And in between the required episodes of Destinos that I had to watch, you are unfamiliar with Destinos.
I am unfamiliar.
It is a soap opera that teaches you Spanish.
Oh.
So it was a very elaborate soap opera.
Like a telenovela?
Kind of, but it was geared towards
high school students.
Well, high school and college students. So like Spanish 1 and Spanish 2. So they would have these very dramatic situations, but they're speaking like "Donde está la biblioteca?"
The most dramatic of questions.
Right. So in between Destino's episodes, they had a dub of Fight Club. And so I would watch Fight Club, and I actually watched it several times because it was the most interesting movie that they had. It was a really fantastic dub. Like, they actually spent a lot of money on the dub. So the voice acting was really, really good. And I remember some things explicitly. They had, when you hear Tyler's voice on the phone, it was distorted from the phone. And they even had the voice actor eating the chips. So you had the crunching of the chips in Spanish. The scene when Tyler goes and Marla is doing her Xanax overdose countdown, and it's with the music, they did that in Spanish. So they had it like overlaid with the music and just some other scenes like that where they really did a really fantastic job with the Spanish dub.
That's pretty cool.
If you're ever going to watch a movie in Spanish, watch Fight Club.
Noted.
So they go to the bar. They have their conversation, or he has his conversation with himself about consumerism and how consumerism has made him soft and made him directionless, and none of that is important in the hunter-gatherer sense of the word. How do you know what a duvet is? I didn't know what a duvet was when I saw this movie, but I know what a duvet is now. Duvets are irritating more than anything.
That is true.
Trying to change them out is a pain. They're usually too heavy.
Yes, but I do know a trick for changing a duvet cover. So if we ever get one, I gotcha.
All right. We're covered. We have that duvet problem solved.
I'm on it because I'm a woman.
So then they start their fight club in the parking lot. Tyler says, I want you to hit me as hard as you can. And then we get the side story about Tyler's jobs and who Tyler is, how he's basically just an element of chaos.
A projectionalist.
Right. He's a projectionalist.
Reference to the nice guys listeners.
So after we learn about Tyler Durden, we have their first fight in the parking lot. We have the "you hit me in the ear," which I love. I think that's so funny. If I remember correctly, that actually was an improv.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think Ed Norton just hit him in the ear, and that was a genuine reaction from Brad Pitt.
That does seem like it would hurt, like in a way that is different than being hit in the face.
I might not be remembering that correctly. One of the things that is fun though is the station wagon that Tyler punches Jack into. That station wagon is from the game, and they didn't. It wasn't on purpose. It wasn't like, hey, here's a callback to the game. They needed
a car.
They needed a car for the set, and they were looking at it and they were like, this looks really familiar. And then they saw the sticker for the company. I can't remember the name of the company, but the company from the game that does the game, and it had a bumper sticker on it that had that company, and they were like, that's the station wagon.
That is pretty cool.
So yeah, they have their first fight. He goes to live at the house in Paper Street, which is just awful.
So bad. That is really where I was like, I feel dirty.
It really, yeah. They do such a good job. David Fincher is really good at putting unsettling imagery on the screen.
That house is really, to me, just such a visual representation of some of the themes of this movie, because it was some things that we've seen already, and then some lines that come up later where it's something that was clearly once very beautiful and something that had some like ornate details that is now just run down and just sad. And so the line that I'm thinking of specifically because I thought that already, I was like, this house just seems like it's sort of visually emblematic of some of these themes. And then later, Edward Norton beats Jared Leto. I thought he may have killed him. I wasn't really sure what was going to happen there. And his explanation for why he had been so aggressive and so violent with him was, I felt like destroying something beautiful. So that I thought back to what I had been thinking about the house, where, yeah, it's something that was beautiful that just is now fallen into disrepair in a way that I guess you could say the people are too.
It is as far from aesthetics as you could want. It is just barely functional. And this is somebody who's trying to flee from that excess consumerism, that excess softness.
Yeah.
He's got the worst mattress in the world. Everything looks terrible. It's water soaked. It is a fire and shocking hazard.
Absolutely.
So it is not soft. Living there means I'm not soft. I don't need anything. I just barely have shelter.
I'm a man. I know I keep coming back to this, but I don't need a cornflower blue dust ruffle. I'll sleep on this dirty mattress.
So then we get to the scene where they make soap, and we get to them stealing fat. That's actually the name of the song that plays the
Stealing
soundtrack.
Fat?
Yeah, Stealing Fat is the name of the song from the soundtrack.
Okay, well, let's be careful how much detail we go into here because I was
You
having
were
a very violent, nauseous reaction to this scene.
I was really worried.
I was gagging.
I've never, and I don't understand because you love the Saw movies.
I know.
You love movies with so much visceral.
No, I know.
But just something about a bag of.
Don't.
You know, it's really funny. That's another thing that I remember from the behind the scenes stuff. They wanted to get it as good as possible. So David Fincher and the prop people were going through like all of these different bags and trying to get like different amounts of floaty bits and things like that and trying to get it just absolutely right. So they had been desensitized to it because they had been seeing it over and over again. And then they get on set and the rest of the crew sees it for the first time and then it's breaking and falling everywhere and everyone else is having the same reaction you do.
Horrifying.
There were people like throwing up, I think.
I'm not surprised. I was really having a hard time with it and I can't explain it. I mean, we've had this conversation before and I am a huge horror movie fan. That is the one genre, I think, where my lack of knowledge of movies doesn't really apply because I've seen a lot of horror movies and a lot of gory horror movies, and yet there are certain types of violence and certain types of visceral, viscera, that I cannot handle. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why some things I'm just like, no, I'll watch Saw. And then I'm gagging at this fat
and
scene.
It is funny. This is another movie that I would say is also, I would say, maybe horror adjacent. There's some similar themes, but instead of, I would say horror movies give you that sort of endorphin from that fear. You have the fear and then you have the endorphin release after that. And this is more like doing that with, I think, black comedy and satire.
Yeah.
And so I would say this movie is, in a way, it's horror adjacent, especially because David Fincher's big breakout movie was Seven. So Seven and he's known, and The Game, so thrillers. He's known for thrillers. He's known for horror adjacent movies and movies in that wheelhouse. I would say this movie isn't really a thriller. I would say if you had to stick a label on Fight Club, it's a black comedy.
But with thriller elements, I would say.
With thriller elements, yeah. I think Fight Club is kind of horror adjacent, but that was the scene when I realized I'm like, oh, okay, there's some elements here that that might tickle that for you or might not, maybe.
I could see what you're saying. I didn't necessarily think that myself, but I mean, horror is a very fluid genre. That is something that horror fans discuss a lot, because even Seven, I think, is an example of a movie where some people don't really consider it horror. They do consider it more of a thriller, which it is, but like I think it is often classified as like a horror thriller. It's very hard to define, but I definitely see what you're saying.
We get back to the house on Paper Street. Jack and Tyler then proceed to make soap, and then that's when Tyler gives Jack his chemical burn.
That was rough to watch too.
It's a really, really well done scene. I love the editing. I love the way where like we have searing fat and it pops on the screen and there's just the very rapid cuts. Brad Pitt slaps Edward Norton so many times in that scene. And they're so visceral. They do things like the frame rate is ramped up a little bit on those slaps. It's such a great, intense scene. I want to say Chuck Palahniuk wrote a short story about visiting the set. And if I remember correctly, it was about the little stamps they made of Brad Pitt's lips to stamp on Edward Norton's hand. And he talked about Brad Pitt's lips. He wrote a lot about Brad Pitt's lips. And I really wonder how anybody thought that this man wasn't homosexual. When he wrote...
I was just thinking
he wrote a little essay about Brad Pitt's lips.
Well,
visiting the set.
Brad Pitt's lips transcend sexuality. I did think it was interesting in this scene too, with, again, tying into the sort of larger themes of the movie. As Edward Norton is fighting this chemical burn, he's, trying to fight to get away from quote unquote Tyler. And he references the support groups, and Brad Pitt says, don't do what those dead people do, which I took to mean the meditating, the sort of opening up about your feelings, the crying, you know. I thought it was really interesting that he said, don't do what those dead people do. Meaning, of course, obviously the people in the support groups are not dead, but they're dying. And I thought that this was, just a way of saying that the people in these groups are coming together for support as they are facing these sort of life-threatening illnesses, but that what they're doing is not the way to, embrace your life and to feel that you are alive, and that pain is the way to do it. And I think that does, again, tie into why the Fight Club comes to exist, is that pain, we get some things later on that suggest near-death experiences are the way to feel alive.
Yeah, he calls it a near-life experience.
Near-life experience, yep, I noted that too. But that people coming together and, well, it's interesting, and I didn't think about this until right this moment, but Chloe, the person at one of the cancer meetings, who seems like she is, she's very sick and probably is dying, and she says, I'm not afraid of death anymore. And I think that the way that the characters are behaving later on, Jack and Tyler and some of the other men in the club, is that that's not the way to approach it, that you should be afraid of dying and you should face that. And then once you have, you will appreciate being alive so much more. And as I'm saying this now, I'm like, that is Jigsaw. Jigsaw did that.
I was going to say, did you realize, we haven't gotten there yet, but when we got to the human sacrifices part, did you realize that Saw ripped off a huge part of this movie?
I didn't make that connection until right now.
Really?
So I really didn't.
Even when he, the scene when they grab poor Raymond K. Hessel out of his job at the convenience store and send him on his way, and he has this little thing about the breakfast he eats tomorrow is going to be the most, his best meal of his life. That really, I haven't watched, most of my familiarity is with Saw is from you. But that's my understanding of Jigsaw's philosophy, and the people who follow Jigsaw as a charismatic leader and do his horrible bidding. A lot of that really seems like they just they borrowed liberally from Seven and Fight Club and put it into a movie together, and then made $1 billion and kept doing it. Yeah,
I feel like there's more. I would need to dig into this more. I would say that scene that you're talking about with Raymond, and, so Tyler holds a gun to his head and makes him promise to go back to veterinary school. And then, yes, he thinks, okay, now everything is going to be so much brighter and so much better tomorrow because he's had this near-death experience. That is Jigsaw's philosophy, but, he does it in a much more convoluted way, honestly, because Jigsaw puts people into these highly designed traps,
right,
where they have to free themselves. He would never just hold a gun to someone's head and say, "Do this."
Right, but that's the seven element.
That's the seven element.
You have John Doe's traps from Seven and all of those crazy designs there, but then you have the philosophy of Fight Club, where you want these people to have a near-life experience.
Yeah.
And you have people following a charismatic criminal doing awful things.
In the first Saw movie, the first person to survive one of Jigsaw's traps, he says to her, well, in the form of his scary puppet on a tricycle, he says, most people are so ungrateful to be alive, but not you, not anymore.
So we get the scene where Tyler saves Marla from her Xanax overdose, which leads to the cool CGI dreamy sex scene.
Yep. That was very interesting to watch. Very visually interesting.
They said that it was awkward to shoot because they basically had to take a bunch of photos of Brad Pitt and Helena Bonham Carter naked in ridiculous poses. And then
I thought it was honestly really beautiful, which, is interesting considering the context of what's happening, and that she is, trying to kill herself, or maybe she says it's just a cry for attention, but either way, it's dark. And, we have Jack and Tyler in this decrepit house, and then Tyler goes there. I mean, it's not set up in a beautiful way, but the sex scene itself, the way that it's shot and the way that it looks is hauntingly beautiful.
And you also called out another point, which is when Tyler's leading her away from her apartment, she's yelling at the cops and she's yelling things about herself. Like, she's a monster. She's a piece of human trash, things like that. Originally, you just think she's this chaotic, unstable person. But then in hindsight, she's just really a sad figure. Like, she really was just looking for human connection, and really somebody who did not have a very good opinion of herself and really just needed a connection and needed somebody. And the person she chose was this guy who couldn't sleep, who had an imaginary friend who is a terrorist.
Well, and that is, it is interesting because I do think that she's tragic, and I like I said, I do really feel for her, and especially in that scene. Yeah, she's yelling these things, and I mean, in a way it's funny because, he's trying to get her away from there and she's drawing attention to herself. But like, it's like the scene on the airplane with Tyler being disparaging towards Jack, that these are the innermost self-loathing thoughts that are being voiced in a different way. And that's what's happening with Marla there. And I think that, it is interesting to go back to the beginning of the movie when Jack first starts going to the support groups, and he's so angry at Marla for being a tourist, even though he himself is. Right. And it's like, he just sees her as a foil, and like, he's just getting in her way. But, she needs that. She's not just there for fun, she needs them in the same way that he needs them, because they're a little broken and they're looking for some kind of a salvation. But the way he treats her is just like, you're just an inconvenience to me.
I think it's funny too. You called out something. These are people who are meant for each other. They have this weird thing in common where they both desperately need a connection to somebody. And so they've done that by infiltrating legitimate support groups. And so they have this one thing in common that nobody else does because it's so weird, but they're both immature. And he calls out, he says, I'm a 30-year-old boy. And I think that speaks to it. It's that fragile masculinity. It's that toxic masculinity, but also an immaturity, just a complete immaturity and a lack of direction. And so they can't make that connection. So instead, it just leads to all of this.
Well, I would also say that probably part of the reason that they can't connect is because they're going to these support groups and they are getting this emotional release, and they're getting this, people listening to them and this human connection, but they're lying about their circumstances. Right. And to be able to connect with each other, knowing that they don't really have any of these conditions, they would have to be truly vulnerable and open up about
that's a great point.
What is wrong with them. And that's why the only way that either of them can express any true self-awareness of what their issues are through these other means, like an imaginary person reflecting them back on you, or just pretending you're talking about yourself. She's talking about her, but she's this, she's that, but they would need to be truly vulnerable with each other to be able to connect, and they can't do it.
No, that's a really, really great point. They get human connection in a voyeuristic way. Like, I am feeling this, but I'm not allowing you to really connect with me. I'm not allowing Bob to know anything about me. I'm not allowing Chloe to know anything about me, but I am getting these things from them. So you're getting this voyeuristic connection with somebody. And so, they would both have to allow each other to be vulnerable to really have that connection. Yeah. And they're both just too immature and too closed off to really do that. So Fight Club continues to grow and takes over the basement at Lou's Tavern, where Brad Pitt doles out the rules of Fight Club. And again, you can see, even if you don't agree with anything he's saying, but you can see, it's so charismatic and it's just fun. And it really does have that cool sense of, all right, this is cool. There was a point, I want to say, in my 20s or late teens where I could recite all of the rules of Fight Club and I could do it exactly like Brad Pitt. And even then, I didn't think that Tyler Durden was someone to be emulated or anything like that. It wasn't, I understood the point of the movie even when I was a kid that this is going too far, but there is that really cool sense of sense of this is something that is cool. Here's somebody who is charismatic. Here is a secret club. Here's a secret club for boys.
Yeah, this is you saying that, and that kind of feeling is, and just thinking about what we were just talking about with the support groups, is a sense of belonging. Like that exactly. is being yearned for by so many people in this movie. And even someone watching it, I could see how you would feel that feeling, even if you didn't agree with everything, to just have that sense of belonging.
That's exactly, I think that's what the movie is about. And that even comes back to the point of the penguin. Like it's these people need belonging, and instead they are going to different things for it. So they're trying to find belonging through consumerism, or they're trying to find belonging through hijacking support groups, or they're trying to find belonging through an incel terrorist group. It really is. It's about people desperately needing connection and feeding that in the worst way possible. So Fight Club grows and escalates. We have the scene with Lou, who comes down and confronts them and in theory beats the shit out of Tyler, but then Tyler scares him to death. And the guy with the gun, I love the idea that the guy has the gun, but then he realizes, oh, there's like 40 dudes down here.
I was thinking that too. when Lou and the gun guy are retreating, he's just like pointing his gun around at everybody. I'm like, you can't take them all.
Yeah, no, they would murder them and end up buried in a garden and a house on Paper Street. But so that scene then leads to the first Project Mayhem assignment, which is you're going to pick a fight and you're going to lose.
Why is that? I was wondering about that.
I mean, I can't speak for Tyler. He's not my imaginary friend. I think it's the idea because he lost the fight with Lou. He got it's that you need to feel alive, and you need to, because there probably are bigger dudes at Fight Club who never lost a fight, maybe. Yeah. But the idea is also to provoke somebody and to provoke a little bit of chaos. If I'm thinking about it, it's to do two things, which is to get you as the Fight Club member to feel that sense of I'm losing, I'm getting the shit kicked out of me, but also for that other person to give them that sense of I started a fight and I won.
Right. And then possibly recruit them, which we know does happen with at least
the seminarian.
Yes. Who I said, oh, that's that guy. And you said good catch. But I do have to admit that I know that actor from a Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen movie. And so that's why I knew that he joined Fight Club, because I recognized him in both scenes.
The scene, both the score of that scene with the happy calliope type music and the Fight Club members trying to pick fights with people. It's really funny.
It is very funny. It's really comical.
And specifically, I think it's Holt McCallany is the one who has the hose, and he's spraying. He's just randomly spraying people, but then he knocks the Bible out of the seminarian's hand and is just spraying it on the ground.
I gasped. You can't knock that kind of...
The Catholic in you.
Yeah, 100%. Have you ever been in a fight?
Yeah, actually, when I was in elementary school. How much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? Have you been in a fight?
I've been in a fight with my brother.
That doesn't count.
Well, I mean, we used to really beat each other up.
That goes back to his philosophy. How much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? So he's trying to spread his philosophy like a virus. He's trying to, trying to remake the world in his image.
And it seems to work, because I literally at one point later on, I'm like, is every single man in the world in Fight Club? Because that's what it felt like.
Yeah, I think that's one of the elements that maybe is horror aligned with this too. That like there's no escape from this. You've created this monster.
That was very scary. Yes.
So that leads then the trying to pick a fight with strangers leads to the scene with Jack and his boss in the office. That's such a great scene.
It really is.
Especially if you didn't know, first of all, you think he's going to pick a fight with his boss and let his boss beat the shit out of him, but he actually just beats the shit out of himself.
Which ties into what was happening at the beginning when he and Tyler were fighting.
Well, yeah, and that's the great reference reference because, first of all, it's just a funny, Ed Norton really plays up the physical comedy of that. So it's out of nowhere. It's a little menacing, but it's very funny. And then you have the freeze frame when he just says, for some reason, I thought of my first fight with Tyler.
Oh, okay.
Which is great
yes.
foreshadowing if you don't know. And it's such a great scene. But like you wouldn't think about that if you thought Tyler was an actual physical person.
So I will say that even though I did know the twist, I had said in the intro that I knew that they were the same character, that I thought that Tyler was, I thought he was an alter ego, which I guess he is. Yeah. And I said I believed that he saw him as a separate person, which all turned out to be true. But I did not know exactly how it worked with like the rest of the characters in the movie. So I didn't necessarily know that first fight actually happened, but just it was Edward Norton beating himself up. That I didn't know until it was revealed, because I was like, maybe that's what's happening as I was watching it, especially when they're being witnessed by other people. They/he, we see later that it's just people watching Edward Norton punch himself in the face.
Which is pretty funny.
It is funny. But so I did have that thought watching the scene with his boss where he's beating himself up, but I wasn't entirely sure of what had been happening. So I knew that things were not as they seemed, but I was like, what is this going to actually have looked like? I didn't know that until we got to that part.
I love the tonal shift of that scene because it is funny and the boss is sort of horrified watching. And then as soon as he flies back into the shelf and he does that, you think he's knocked out, but then he just punches himself twice in the face again.
Yes.
But then it cuts and you see him crawling and he's got the blood squirting out of his wrist and he's got the glass embedded in his hand. And that shifts the scene to very serious all of a sudden.
I would say, honestly, that the boss's face for part of it is not even horrified. It's just more like, what the fuck is happening? He looks confused more than anything, at least at the very beginning.
And then the great capper, like, please stop hitting me when he comes in after blackmailing the boss. And then the security guards come in to witness and it looks like.
And then he strolls out whistling. Yeah. And he's covered in blood.
He's covered in blood.
But he got what he wanted.
And he has his 1990s computer in a shopping cart. It's so great.
Like, you can't see half of his face because it's so bloody.
Yeah. So then now they have funding for Project Mayhem. So Project Mayhem expands and becomes a full-on cult at this point. They have to stand outside and do the whole ritual to get admitted. They have to lose their name and their identity. They have to shave their head like a monkey getting ready to get shot into space.
Yes. I noted a couple of things about this scene. First of all, Tyler, or Jack, is building bunk beds. And Edward Norton says, why do we need bunk beds? And I was like, why don't you need bunk beds? I mean, everybody does. So then when I realized what was happening, that they were going to have the Fight Club members come and live with them, I called it Fight Club boarding school. And they do. They have to wait on the porch and be berated for 3 days before they are finally allowed to join. They just have to wait there and show that they're made of the right stuff to be part of Fight Club boarding school. And they're being told, well, the first guy is too young. And then Bob shows up and he's too fat and his
too old and your tits are too big.
Yes. And then Jared Leto shows up and he says, you're too
fucking blonde.
And I was like, to be fair, he is too fucking blonde.
Even his eyebrows, man.
Yeah, he was too blonde.
His character's name is Angel Face. I don't know I don't know how much they say that.
I don't think that they do. I saw that when I looked the movie up afterward, but I don't think that's referenced in the movie. But I mean, he is very pretty. He's a very pretty man. Well, until he gets his face completely deformed by Edward Norton.
So Fight Club boarding school escalates and escalates. We get to the death of Bob. They were out doing some vandalism, again, anti-capitalist, anti-consumerist vandalism. One of the things I love about this movie is it's not necessarily tied to a single philosophy, and you can see how the extremes of it, because anti-capitalist, I can be very aligned with anti-capitalist sentiment, but also there's that sort of horseshoe where it connects to that incel, that maybe fascist, where we're looking for a strong leader who's going to blame all of our problems on something else and give us a purpose. And I think it's interesting how this movie shows that there's vulnerability from a lot of different angles to that sort of thing. I don't know.
No, it does make sense. I was going to say the Project Mayhem, I almost said Project Runway. Shows where my head's at. The Project Mayhem mission that we see is that they are told that they need to destroy a piece of corporate art and also a
franchise coffee bar.
A franchise coffee bar. So they destroy this piece of art that is a giant ball that they release, and it goes rolling into the coffee shop. And I thought, well, that was very efficient. And if you can be one thing, you should be efficient.
If you can be one thing, you should be efficient. Jack rightly points out that if you're running around blowing shit up as terrorists with masks in the night, you're going to get shot. And Bob gets shot in the back of the head.
Yeah.
He also had children who didn't like him. Apparently, he had a wrecked marriage. So this was the only thing he had going for him. And I really love that this sort of amplifies the horror of what happened. Another theme that you and I haven't talked about that I think this movie touches on a lot is the relationship of men with each other, men with their fathers. You know, the movie starts with Jack started Fight Club with Tyler, but then there's nights that people are going to Fight Club that Jack's not there. And when Bob mentions, do you know who started Fight Club? And, you know, Jack's nodding and he's like, yeah, it's me. And then he's like, have you heard of Tyler Durden? And then you can just see the jealousy on Jack's face and the envy of that. You talked about the scene where he has the fight with Angel Face and he just beats the shit out of Angel Face. That's immediately following the scene where they go in and they terrorize the police commissioner and Tyler tousles Angel Face's hair. I guess the implication being that Angel Face helped plan it, or this was maybe Angel Face's idea. He tousles Angel Face's hair and like basically gives him a good idea and almost ignores Jack. And then he finally calls Jack and is like, hey, come on too.
I remember that.
He says he wants to destroy something beautiful, but also there's jealousy there.
Yeah.
There's this, someone else is getting the attention and affection that I think I deserve. And a lot of that also, again, ties into what he says about his dad leaving. His dad's fucker setting up franchises. I always love that line. So his dad leaving when he was a kid, him having that strained relationship with his dad when he, after the car accident, when he's in and out of it, the last thing Tyler says to him is, feel better, champ. And I always thought, I don't know how explicit it is in the text or anything, but my reading of it is that's the last thing his dad said before his dad left their family. And I always thought that Tyler looked like his dad. Maybe like a young version of his dad. Like, you know how you see a photograph of your dad when he's in his 30s and you're like, that's not my dad. I don't know who that guy is. I always imagined that Tyler looked like a young version of Jack's dad.
That's
like
interesting. Yeah.
So in my head, just because of that relationship that they have and the way this movie explores those relationship dynamics.
That is really interesting because based on that read of it, I could see that moment where Tyler tousles Angel Face's hair, that could be read a few different ways, especially with Edward Norton's jealousy as a result, because that could be, if he does see him as like a father figure or relates him to his father, that could be a fatherly move, or just in terms of general affection. Like you mentioned before that there might be some sort of gay subtext, and that could also cause jealousy and especially with him saying that he wanted to destroy something beautiful, that this particular person having a connection with Tyler could be a source of jealousy if there's anything to that read, which it seems like there might be. I also wanted to say that I was personally very angry about Bob's storyline in a good way and in a way that means the movie made me feel something, pretty strongly, because it just seems to me like Bob was getting something out of the support group meetings, and him joining Fight Club and then eventually joining Project Mayhem. I mean, he was indoctrinated, and it's like he was corrupted, and then it ended up getting him killed. And I'm like, I just wish that he had just stayed with the support groups, you know?
Yeah.
Like that goes back to the part where, you know, Tyler said, don't do what those dead people are doing, and is casting aspersions on what people could get out of the support groups, and implying that something like Fight Club or Project Mayhem is a better way of dealing with your own mortality and feeling a sense of purpose and feeling alive. And I'm like, but Bob was getting something out of the support groups, and changing his perspective on it is what led to his death. And it just seems like such a waste to me.
And it makes it even sadder when you watch in hindsight, because he starts to leave. When he shows up for Project Mayhem, he turns around and he starts to leave. And then Jack comes by when you are ostensibly, there's two separate people. Jack goes and corrects him and tells him what he actually needs to do, because he didn't have the correct directions.
I forgot about that.
And you think at the time, you think it's an act of kindness that Jack is being kind to him. And I guess maybe Jack at that point maybe thinks it's an act of kindness, because he doesn't really know that he hasn't internalized that it's also him doing this. But it makes it extra sad in hindsight, because he could have escaped and he might have gotten away, and somebody thinks that they're doing something nice for you, but really it led to your death.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. But then that scene in general, I think that's really the turning point of the movie, because you have this character that you're asked to identify with and care about, who is shot reasonably because he's in a place that he's come along with these space monkeys. He's joined this cult, and now the cult has gotten away. So they have that scene where Jack is telling them off. In his head, it's Jack. They're all saying Tyler Durden. And then you have Holt McCallany. Holt McCallany is one of those that guys. He had I want to say it was a Showtime show briefly called Lights Out that I watched a few episodes of that was really good. He's just one of those guys when he shows up. He's a that guy who I really like.
Recognize him, and I looked him up after, and he's just been in a bunch of episodes of shows I've seen.
Yeah. But he has that, I understand, in death, we all have names. His name is Robert Paulson. And that's the scene when they really like play into the cult.
Yeah.
And
that is the scene where I was like, this is very cult-like, the chanting and that cognitive dissonance of the messaging that they're getting from the same person, although we don't know that yet, but it's the same person who told them Project Mayhem members don't have names, is now saying, no, he has a name. And to have to try to like reconcile those conflicting ideas, he has to be like, oh, it's because he's dead now. So it's in death that people have names. And then like mental gymnastics to make things make sense.
The mental gymnastics, the religious indoctrination of it. It's all so well done, and it's staged in such a way that they do it so quickly. They're able to get so many dense ideas in a 2-hour and 20-minute movie. It's really well done. Again, that's why I love this movie so much, because it's just so masterfully done. So then things get out of hand. Jack tries to figure out what's going on. He chases everything down. I love the way the tension builds in the scene when Jack is following Tyler, and the narration is so great. I remember watching it just being on the edge of my seat, because I was like, no, wait, no, like, because the narration is just like hinting at it and teasing it out and teasing it out. And then you finally get to the bartender in the metal collar who's like, is this a test, sir? And he's the one who explicitly drops the line. And I just remember the first time I saw it, like my jaw was just on the floor and just stayed open until the scene when Brad Pitt shows up in the hotel, and then they have the conversation and it makes it all. And I just remember having my mind so blown. So I'm really sad that you weren't able to experience that this way. It's so great because it builds in just the perfect way where it lets everybody catch up at their own speed, and then it makes it explicit at the end, but it's not like overly, like there's a line at the end of The Prestige that always bothers me, because it's like, yeah, duh, like you're clearly explaining this for the stupid people in the audience, and there's none of that in this movie. Like, but the stupid people still get to catch up, and
that's not very nice.
I'm just saying it's not overly spoon-fed, but there's enough there that if you're with the movie, you get it, and then it visually shows you what happened and you understand at this point. But it's just so masterfully done. When my kid turned 15, we watched it together, and my kid didn't know. So I thought that they would have known the twist just the same way you did, just through pop culture osmosis. And it was a total surprise. So I loved getting to that moment in the movie and looking over and seeing my kid's face was just like, when I realized that they didn't know, I was like, oh, this is going to be great.
I wish that I'd had that experience. I do.
It's just such a fantastic reveal, and the movie does it so masterfully. So then we get into the back half of the movie, or not the back half, the end of the movie. Jack is running around trying to stop, and
what they've been up to is they're going to bomb credit card companies.
Correct.
To erase the debt.
Erase the debt record.
That led me to question whether that would have worked.
I mean,
it was 1999. Were things not digital at that point?
They still would have had offsite backups, and the internet still existed in 1999.
That just didn't strike me as realistic. And I thought it was interesting because I did look up the book thinking, well, maybe, I don't know when the book was published, maybe it would have been, different. And the book was published in 96. And I'm like, well, even 96 to 99. But in the book, they don't blow up credit card companies. They're going to blow up a museum.
That's funny.
I was like, that doesn't seem like it would actually do what they're aiming for it to do. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's all a futile.
Right. Well, it's an immature, childish idea of anarchy. It's this immature view of, if I blow these buildings up, it's going to reset everyone's debt records and we'll be able to it's very American centric also, maybe you'll reset people in America, but like the rest of the world and the global economy exists. And also it's just credit. Like it's maybe these credit card companies, but it's not, and you're not thinking about like backups and offsite things and other records that might exist anywhere else. So it's this very surface level philosophy of, if I do this, then that's gonna be my ultimate plan, and it's amazing. But you're right, there's so many holes in it. It's a very childish view of the world, and I think the movie does a good job of portraying like this is a very immature philosophy. And so people who think, yeah, no, that's great, who are going to be inclined to agree with Tyler's philosophy, tend to be pretty immature and they don't think these things through. And
in a certain sense, maybe they weren't even really that concerned about whether or not it was going to work, because that's a very showy display of power, you know, and for a lot of them, that may have been all that it was about, was not the ideology behind it, but just blowing things up for the sake of blowing things up and coming up with a reason to do it after the fact. I mean,
their first big debut was setting a building on fire, which the news said it was a 4-alarm fire, and it was just like 2 windows.
Yeah.
It's like 2 windows with flames coming out of them in a spray painted building. Like, is that a 4-alarm fire? Like, I would expect the whole skyscraper, you wouldn't be able to see the smiley face if it was a 4-alarm fire. But whatever.
That's true. I didn't think about that.
But so they're big on vandalism and making a big show. And the movie also hints at how many other Project Mayhem members there are in all of these other major cities with airports. My impression is that Tyler's plans got short-circuited after Jack made the connection, because that's when he makes the call, and the Project Mayhem in their home city, it's never named, it's always a generic city. It's hinted that it's Wilmington, Delaware is the movie. That's
interesting,
because that's where all the credit card companies are incorporated because of Delaware's incorporation laws and things like that. So the skyline at the end, when all the buildings are blowing up, the skyline is an amalgamation of buildings that Fox owned at the time, because it was easier to get legal rights. If you're going to blow up a building, you have to get the rights to show the building. I love the scene when he goes to the cops and tells them to arrest him, and the 3 detectives are left alone in the room, and they're like, it turns out they're Project Mayhem members too.
Yeah, the scenes where he's chasing Tyler, quote unquote, again, around and meeting all of the Project Mayhem members in other cities, and then the detectives in the home city, those were the most horror-like scenes, because it's just very sinister. They're just standing there looking at him with this kind of we're with you, you know, and it's very creepy.
The winks and
yes, and all with various injuries. The worst of which I think is the bartender, who has a halo.
Yeah,
which is, that guy is effed.
The detectives are named after Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote Seven. So they're Detective Andrew, Detective Kevin, and Detective Walker.
Oh, that's interesting.
I love the way you see him in the movie. He's pantsless in his robe with he's beaten. He has the gun.
Edward Norton.
Yeah. So in the beginning of the movie, and so you see how all of that happens.
Yeah.
You see the bullet hole through the van. You see all of that. We get to the end of the movie, the final confrontation when he tries to disarm one of the bombs. It doesn't matter. Tyler rearms it and locks the door of the van. And that's when he shoots it. One of my favorite lines. You're shooting at your imaginary friend in front of 15 pounds of nitroglycerin.
That was very funny.
I love the way the parking lot fight is staged, where you see the two of them. The movie lets you see the two of them. But then when you see the security monitors, it's just Edward Norton, or Edward Norton's stunt double anyway, just beating the crap out of himself.
Yeah, no, that was really good. That was very visually interesting. So you have not mentioned yet, but before that happens, he has called Marla. Did he call her or did he find her somewhere?
He called her from the hotel. She went over. He tried to tell her not to. And then that's when Tyler takes over and passes out. Tyler calls. So she apparently gets a little manhandled. He, I guess, reaches out to her off screen. We don't see that, but he gets back. She meets him at the diner.
Yes. And he is trying to convince her that she needs to leave town for her own safety because she has discovered that he is... I'm a little confused about how exactly to put it. She's called him Tyler. We've all put the pieces together that they are the same person. Tyler and Jack are the same person. I guess in Tyler's mind, she now knows too much. And so Tyler tells the other Project Mayhem members that she is a threat because she knows too much. Am I understanding that correctly? Because I don't really know what kind of threat she is. She already seemed to know that he was a little unhinged.
I mean, I think the textual, if you read into it, the reading is because she doesn't know anything about their plans. Maybe, I mean, you could say maybe she saw the stuff on the walls in the house when she went, but maybe not. I don't know. I think the real reading is because Tyler knows she's an existential threat to Tyler, because Tyler only exists because Jack couldn't talk to her, and now Jack knows that he is Tyler. Maybe he has confidence enough he knows that all of that actually was him, and so that makes her an existential threat to Tyler.
Okay, so he believes that she's a threat, so Tyler believes that she's a threat, so he tells the other Project Mayhem members that she's a threat, and they are going to go after her. So Jack tries to tell her that she needs to get out of town. He goes so far as to put her on a bus and say, I can't know where you're going or you won't be safe. That plan goes awry because, she gets on the bus, he watches it drive away, but later when he is in the warehouse, is it a warehouse? Is that where the end is?
Oh, no, it's another skyscraper. It's a safe skyscraper.
Okay. So at the end, when he is in the skyscraper with Tyler, he looks out the window and he sees the Project Mayhem members bringing Marla from the bus into the building.
Yeah, there's a great shot too, and I don't know if you noticed it, when she gets on the bus and starts driving away, she's walking back on the bus, and then you see a bunch of shady figures stand up, and it's just a blink and you'll miss it.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Are they just shifting?
So they were on the bus?
You just see 8 people stand up on the bus, and it's a very, very fast shot.
Oh,
so it's
that's
a blink
really
and you'll
cool.
miss it.
Totally missed that. She is kidnapped by them and is brought into the building.
Well, yeah.
But there's some more things have happened.
So then there's the final climactic showdown. First of all, I love the joke, the flashback humor joke, where he says they go back to where the movie begins, the opening scene in the movie, and instead of I can't think of anything, he says I still can't think of anything, and Tyler responds, flashback humor.
Yeah, that was good.
Probably my all-time favorite fourth wall breaking joke in a movie. So then we have the confrontation when Jack realizes he's actually in control.
That is pretty cool because Tyler's holding a gun on him, and then he does know that they're the same person, but he's still seeing Tyler as a separate person, but he seems to really come to terms with the fact that he's not. And so Tyler has the gun, and then he says, there's a gun in your hand. So there's a gun in my hand.
Right.
And then it the shot changes where now Jack is holding the gun.
And Jack's final way to resolve Tyler is to say, I need you to really listen to me, which now that we've talked about this, the I need you to really listen to me stands out. It's him asserting his voice and him saying, I need you to listen to me. And he says, my eyes are open. He shoots himself through the cheek, and that's the end of Tyler. What do you think about that?
I didn't really know what to make of that. I didn't realize at first that he was shooting himself through the cheek. It looked like he was shooting himself in the head.
Yeah.
Because he puts the gun in his mouth, and it looked like it was going to be a suicide. And so then when he was still alive, I was very confused until I realized that he had actually shot himself through the cheek.
Yeah, he blinks. It looks like he's dead for a moment, and then you see him blink twice, I think, after just lying there for a second.
I think I'm not really sure what to make of it. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about that. Just trying to think about it now, I think that seems to sort of reinforce some of the themes of the movie, in that, Jack faces death to be sort of reborn in a new way with a new perspective. And there's, the element of physical pain as a way of feeling alive. These are themes that we've seen, and I don't necessarily know that I agree with those, but this scene seems to reinforce that in a very literal way, in that shooting himself in the face is the way that he reclaims himself fully.
Symbolically, it's almost like I'm killing that part of myself. I'm no longer need this part of myself, so I am going to do away with it. I think narratively, it's a good fake out for the audience, because you do think that he's shooting himself in the head. He doesn't.
After he shoots himself in the cheek and he's alive and Tyler is now gone, the Project Mayhem guys bring Marla to the room where he is, and Jack convinces them to leave Marla alone with him, and he explains.
He doesn't explain much.
He doesn't really explain much, but he does say that he shot himself, because she's like, what happened to you? And he's
I shot myself.
And then I definitely have seen the last few images, which is them standing holding hands in this big window where you see all the buildings collapsing, and the Pixie song starts to play. And then he says, you met me at a very interesting time in my life. I've definitely seen / heard that, but I didn't know that this is what it was from.
That's funny. It's a great line. It's a great killer. It's a killer ending line. The Pixie song, Where Is My Mind? I've seen it referenced at least 2 other times in TV shows whenever there are characters who have imaginary friends, or like characters who aren't really there, or characters who think they have an imaginary friend. It was referenced in the ones that I know of are Mr. Robot and The Tick, the live action version of The Tick, the recent live action version of The Tick. So those are at least 2 times that they know, they're like, we know Fight Club did this, so we're going to reference it with the Pixie song, because it's just a perfect way to end the movie.
It really is. It was a great ending, but we don't really know what happens to the movement in the movie, because it does end after the buildings collapse and that's it.
Yeah, no, it's a great ending, because it's like you don't blow up 5 or 6 skyscrapers, whatever it is, in the middle of a major American city without any kind of consequences and getting away with it.
Well, and I had thought it was interesting, and this may be another example of their immaturity in planning these rebellions, is that at a certain point when Jack has figured out that blowing up these buildings is the ultimate goal of Project Mayhem, when he is having the confrontation with Tyler says the buildings are empty, all of the security and the staff are our people, so like no one's gonna get hurt. And I'm like, you can't blow up that many buildings in a city and have nobody get hurt.
Right.
Those buildings collapsed to the ground. Like, there are people on the street. Someone's going to get hurt.
Yeah. Again, it's that whole, like, we've thought of this. Don't worry about it. It's that very immature, not thinking things
Absolutely.
through. I know what's right. This will fix everything.
It is a very cool shot when the buildings collapse, though. That it looks really cool.
So that's Fight Club. I really love this movie. I think it has held up incredibly well. In fact, maybe it's aged even better now in the hindsight of the last 25 years, just seeing what we've been through and seeing the scene where we didn't talk about this, but the scene where Jack's boss finds the Fight Club manifesto on the copier, brings it to him, and he not so vaguely threatens to shoot up the office. Shootings were way less. I mean, the phrase going postal existed then, but there weren't as many mass shootings in the 90s.
Well, you had mentioned in the intro that the movie's release was delayed because of Columbine, and
it was supposed to come out in the summer of 99.
Okay, and so Columbine was in April, and so I made a note at that part of like, is this kind of very detailed reference to a mass shooting? Was that a big part of why the movie was delayed?
I think that was part of it, and just the overall themes of violence. And again, the marketing team did not know how to sell this movie. It's a hard movie to sell because the people you want to come see it are going to not think this is the movie for me if they think it's a movie about guys in suits and ties punching it.
Right.
But if you don't advertise guys in suits punching each other, then no one's going to come see your $100 million movie. So.
Yeah.
Or whatever it cost.
But I agree with you that I think that it's aged well in a very terrifying way, in the sense that the threats of people like the Project Mayhem members are very realistic in 2024 in a way that they may not have been. This may have been sort of an exaggeration of this kind of mindset that is very true to life and very relevant to all of us in this current year.
Yeah, I mean, well-aged satire always seems like a documentary in hindsight.
Yeah.
So, So closing thoughts.
I still don't know that I would say that I enjoyed it because I felt like it was kind of hard to watch, but I think that makes it a really good movie. It had a lot to say, and I thought it was very visually appealing. Some very cool shots, very interesting characters. Like overall, very, very well made movie. Made me feel a little bleak, but gave me a lot to think about. So
especially about the Saw movies.
Especially about the Saw movies. I'm going to write an essay about the link between David Fincher movies and the Jigsaw expanded universe, the Sawniverse, as I have previously called it. So, yes, my closing thought is Tyler Durden is Jigsaw. Thank you. Good night.
All right. And on that note, I'm Dan.
I'm Heather.
Thank you for listening to us, and we'll see you next time on Blind Spots and Second Thoughts.